I didn't mean to overhear. I had just poured their coffee mine with 1 sugar theirs without, and was on my way upstairs when his voice stopped me cold. That fat Hippo disgusts me. She's only good for her money. The tray in my hands didn't rattle, but something inside me cracked. My son said that. Darren. My Darren. I stood frozen on the middle stair, just out of sight, and waited. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe Olivia would correct him. But all I heard was her quiet laugh. "We just have to keep her happy a little longer," she said. "Then we'll figure out how to move everything over." I turned around before they saw me. My hands were steady. I don't know how. I brought the tray back to the kitchen and set it down. Without a sound. The coffee was still warm. I wiped the counter, ran the water, dried my hands. Everything looked clean. I went back to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I just sat there staring at the dust, dancing in the slant of light through the curtain. I thought about the last time Darren made me coffee. He was 15. He burned the toast and used orange juice instead of milk in my cereal. I ate every bite. Told him it was perfect. Now here he was, planning how to carve up my life like I was already gone. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. The silence felt thick, like I could sink into it and never reach the bottom. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just hollow, but I wasn't stupid, not anymore. And when I heard the front door open downstairs, the sound of Darren leaving, I stood up. Slowly walked to my closet and reached for the lockbox I hadn't touched in 5 years. The key was still in my jewelry case taped to the bottom. I peeled it off with careful fingers, unlocked the box, and opened the lid. I left the lockbox open on my bed for a long time. Just stared at the rows of papers I hadn't touched since Henry passed. Titles, bonds, old banking forms with embossed stamps. I used to think they made me feel secure. Now they just felt like bait. I went to the kitchen around noon, mostly to feel normal. Make tea, maybe slice an apple. I wasn't hungry, but it felt like something I could control. That's when I saw it. A printed document left right on the counter like a shopping list. Projected transfer value. It had my name on it. I didn't touch it right away. I read the title again. Then the words below it. Real estate estimates. Cash holdings. Remaining liquid assets. The line items were my life, my home, my retirement fund, my investment property in Chapel Hill. I'd never told Darren I still owned. He knew, or Olivia did. I picked it up and flipped the page. There were projections how much each asset would grow in the next 5 years. Not if I kept them, but if someone else did. Inheritance preparation 1 section read, and below that, handwritten in blue ink, timeline adjust if mom delays transition. I felt my throat tighten. Transition. That was the word they'd chosen. As if I was a business they planned to close. As if my life was a matter of execution dates and waiting it out. There was a sticky note clipped to the second page. Not meant for me. Run through with Alex, make sure tax side is clean. Also check if she still uses the same signature. I sat down at the table, paper in hand. Everything in me wanted to tear it up, scream, throw the kettle across the room. But I didn't move. I reached into the drawer, pulled out an envelope, and slid the pages inside. I wrote a date on the front. Just a date, no name. Then I went to the living room, turned on the lamp, and opened my laptop. I didn't sleep. I just lay there with the envelope beside me on the nightstand, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. At some point past midnight, I got up and opened the lockbox again. The papers inside still smelled faintly of old envelopes and ink. I hadn't touched them in years, not since Henry's funeral. Everything had felt too final back then. I kept telling myself there would be time to sort it later. Now I wished I'd moved faster. I pulled out the manila folder near the back, the one with the deed to the cabin near Laurel Ridge. It wasn't much, just a quiet place we'd once talked about fixing up. But it was mine, free and clear. Darren didn't even know it existed. I flipped through the rest. Passwords. The old EIN from when I sold my appraisal business. A few bond certificates I never cashed. Then, tucked beneath them, a faded business card, Charles Langley Estate and Transition Law. Atlanta, GA. I sat back down at my laptop and typed slowly, deliberately. Subject, Longtime body. It's Corinne Halstead. I need to move the rest. Quietly. Are you available next week? I stared at it for a long time before hitting send. The cursor blinked back at me. Nothing else moved. I left the email open, then pulled up my account dashboards one by one. Real estate holdings, retirement savings, trust fund balances. Everything I'd worked my entire life for, stacked neatly in columns. I opened a new spreadsheet and titled it Exit File. The cabin would need a new set of locks. The business filings would have to be restructured. I'd need to dissolve the joint access Darren had to the emergency account, and I'd need to do it without raising questions. My hand was steady as I typed. I wasn't sure if this was grief or anger. Maybe both. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. By the time the birds started chirping outside my window, I had a plan. The woman at the bank was polite, almost too polite. Her voice stayed level, but I could hear the hesitation in every word. I'm showing multiple transactions, Mrs. Halstead. The most recent was last Tuesday, $12,000. I swallowed. That can't be right. The emergency account isn't touched unless I authorize it. That was the rule. She paused again. It was withdrawn using the branch form. Signed and verified. We have the slip on file. I asked her to email it to me. It arrived before we even hung up. My hands were cold as I clicked the attachment. There it was, plain as day. My name, my account number, my supposed signature. But it wasn't mine. I knew my loops. I knew my slant. Whoever signed it didn't even try very hard to copy me. The second slip was dated 3 weeks before that, $36,000. Same ink. Same curve of forged letters. The total was $48,000. I stared at the number like it might shrink if I looked long enough. I hadn't touched that account in over a year. It was meant for medical emergencies, car wrecks, hurricanes. Not this. I downloaded both documents, renamed the files, and backed them up on an encrypted drive I kept in the safe behind the pantry door. Then I pulled out my phone and called Langley's number from the business card. He picked up on the second ring. You were right to contact me, he said, after I explained everything. Don't touch the account again. I'll have someone issue a fraud trace this afternoon. Do not mention this to your son. I thanked him. I don't remember if my voice broke. I hung up, sat down at the kitchen table and looked out the window while the kettle whistled. He'd taken from me, deliberately, quietly. And worse, he didn't even bother hiding it well, because he thought I wouldn't check, because he thought I wouldn't fight. That afternoon, I closed the joint account and requested printed statements for the last 2 years. They handed me a thick envelope still warm from the printer. I drove straight home and packed my first box. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen as Darren pulled the pork loin out of the oven. Olivia had set the table half-heartedly, with mismatched plates and a chipped wine decanter she always claimed was vintage. She poured herself a glass before anyone sat down. I set the bread basket in the middle, folded my hands in my lap, and waited for the show to begin. Darren carved slowly like he was hosting something grander than a 3-person lunch in a house that no longer felt like mine. How's your cough? Mom Olivia asked sweetly, cutting her pork into thin, perfect bites. The guest room gets drafty this time of year. I smiled. I've decided to move out. The knife paused mid-slice. I took a sip of water. There are some properties I need to check on. A cabin. And I've been thinking of spending time in Asheville again. Change of pace. Darren cleared his throat. You don't need to do that. We've got everything covered here. I know, I said gently. That's why it's a good time to go. They didn't ask questions. Not really. Olivia offered a polite nod, Darren a strained smile, and the rest of the meal passed in shallow talk about local road work and how late the leaves were changing this year. I excused myself before dessert, said I needed to check the mailbox. I walked out with my coat on, even though it was barely cool, and zipped it up halfway. Inside the inner pocket, tucked beneath a tissue and a grocery list I didn't need, was a USB drive. On it, scanned withdrawal slips, trust documents, deed transfers, and the full spreadsheet marked exit file. In my room, I sealed it in a padded envelope already addressed to Langley's office. They wouldn't notice it missing, but they would notice what came after. The next morning, I called the realtor who handled my late friend's home sale. I told her I had a property to list quietly under a holding company name and that I didn't want my son or daughter-in-law notified. By Tuesday, I was on the road before sunrise, driving west past 2 counties and through fog so thick it looked like the road was disappearing ahead of me. I kept the radio off. My thoughts were loud enough. The notary's office was in a small law firm above a hardware store. Quiet, unremarkable. Just the way I needed it. I signed 6 documents. 1 for the trust, 1 for the new holding company, 1 transferring the Asheville property into the trust, 1 removing Darren's name as a secondary beneficiary, added years ago when I still thought I was building something for him, 2 more for the bank and brokerage accounts. Each pen stroke felt like lifting a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. After we finished, the assistant handed me copies all neatly bound. I placed them in my bag and locked it. I asked her to shred the originals, then left through the side door. On the way back, I stopped in Hendersonville to meet with my realtor in a cafe where no one would recognize me. We reviewed the paperwork and the listing terms. The house would be posted under a corporate name. No direct ties to me. No open house. Serious buyers only. Discreet process. She looked surprised at first. "Are you sure you want to list under an LLC?" but didn't push. She saw something in my face that told her not to ask. I told her I'd be gone before the listing went live. That afternoon, I returned to the cabin and walked the perimeter. The place was still solid. It would take work, but it could be home. No one knew it existed. Not Darren, not Olivia. Not even Henry's brother, who used to handle the family affairs before we split everything. By dusk, I was back in the city. I stopped by the county clerk's office and requested updated title records. When the clerk slid them across the counter, I read each one carefully. Every property that once connected me to Darren, gone, removed, dissolved. At home, I packed 3 more boxes labeled only with numbers. I left them in the garage next to the car I'd already had serviced for the trip. I woke before the sun. No alarm, no hesitation. My eyes opened, and I knew it was time. I moved through the house softly, the way I used to when Darren was a baby, and any creak of the floor might wake him. Only this time I didn't care if anyone heard me. I just didn't want to give them the privilege of a scene. I loaded the car first. Just essentials, my files, my bags, the things I didn't trust movers with. The rest was already sorted and labeled. I'd marked every box in the garage with a small red dot. Mine. No one would question it. The movers arrived at 8 sharp, just like the company promised. 2 men, quiet and efficient. They didn't ask questions. They didn't linger. I watched them carry out the last box of my books, the sewing machine, and the rocking chair from the back porch. Things I'd kept, not because I used them every day, but because they reminded me I had once built something. By 10 o'clock, the house was hollow. No one had come downstairs. I didn't slam the door. I didn't turn back. I simply walked out the same way I used to come home from work and find Darren waiting at the window with peanut butter on his chin. Only now the windows were blank. I slid into the car and backed out of the driveway without looking up. It wasn't sadness I felt. It wasn't even freedom. It was clarity, sharp and plain like morning light on a glass you forgot to clean. I didn't owe them a goodbye. Halfway down the block, I saw Olivia's car parked 2 houses away. She never liked waking early on Sundays. I kept driving. By the time the first text from Darren buzzed in, I was already miles out of town, headed toward the cabin and the locksmith who was waiting there with a new set of keys. The first call came at 6:42 a.m. I watched the phone buzz against the kitchen counter, Darren's name lighting up the screen like it used to when he needed a ride or money or both. I didn't answer. The second call followed 5 minutes later, then the third. By the fifth, I muted the sound. I let them pile up while I stirred my tea. It wasn't until noon that I listened to the first voicemail. Mom, where's the house deed I was supposed to send the file to Alex today, and it's not in the drawer? Did you move it? He sounded impatient. Not worried. Not yet. I saved it. Played the next. I don't understand. Olivia's freaking out. The accounts are weird. Some of them aren't showing up on my login. Did you touch something? What's going on? There it was uncertainty. The first crack in the voice of someone who had never imagined I might move without asking. The third message was shorter. Just heavy breathing and the sound of a slammed door in the background. I deleted them all. Then I turned off the phone completely and placed it in the drawer with the flashlight and spare batteries. It didn't belong on the counter anymore. It belonged with the things you only need in storms. Outside, the wind had picked up. I could hear the trees around the cabin swaying like tall, restless ghosts. I walked to the front porch, sat down with my tea, and listened to the creak of wood beneath me. The kind of creak that reminded you the world still had weight. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel triumphant, but I wasn't afraid. That night, I lit a fire in the old wood stove and wrote a list of things that still belonged to me, things no one had signed for or withdrawn behind my back. Most of them weren't even objects. I was halfway through the list when the landline rang, once then stopped. I didn't check the ID. I just turned the page and kept writing. The emails started arriving in clusters. Notifications from the trust manager, the bank, the realtor. The house had gone under contract within 48 hours. The offer was clean. Cash. Above asking. The holding company accepted it without hesitation. Darren didn't know who the seller was. His name had never been on the paperwork. By Thursday, the joint account he'd been quietly siphoning from was officially frozen flagged for irregular withdrawals and suspected forgery. The bank launched a review. I didn't need to say a word, just submitted the scanned slips and let the fraud department do what it was built for. By Friday, I heard from Langley. Olivia had tried to contact one of the investment firms listed in my old records. She was told politely that she wasn't an authorized party. She called again and again, then finally stopped. I imagine the moment she realized the credit card wasn't going through. The first transaction declined. The car loan payment reversed. The buffer she thought was endless suddenly dry. I didn't gloat, but I didn't pity them either. The last message came from Darren himself. One sentence, no punctuation. Why would you do this to your own son? I stared at it for a long time. He'd called me a fat hippo 2 weeks ago, told his wife I was only useful for my money, forged my signature, took nearly $50,000 and counted on me never noticing. And now he wanted to know why I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't feed the part of him that still thought I owed him something. The silence would speak loud enough. I shut the laptop and stood letting the screen fade to black behind me. Outside, the clouds had shifted, letting in slivers of light across the porch. I stepped out into it, breathed in deep, and finally felt the weight lift from my chest. There were no more documents to file, no more calls to dodge, no more versions of myself I needed to explain away. The final box slid across the floor with a soft thud. Nothing heavy, just some linens, my books, and the kettle I refused to leave behind. I stood in the center of the cabin, still catching my breath, still listening. The new locks had been installed the day before. I'd watched the locksmith test each one, hearing the clean click of the deadbolt slide into place, strong, deliberate, final. No spare keys handed out, no backups in the junk drawer. This space didn't echo yet, but it would. It was mine now. Just mine. I walked to the small kitchen counter and set down my bag. The air smelled faintly of pine from the cleaner I'd used the night before. Not rosemary, not fake citrus, just clean. From the side pocket of my satchel, I pulled out a small frame wrapped in a dish towel. The photo was old, worn at the corners, but still sharp enough to see the way I once smiled. I was holding Darren in my arms, no more than 6 months old, his hand clutching my necklace with the wild grip babies have when they think everything is still part of them. I stared at it for a moment. Not in pain, not in longing, just recognition. That woman in the photo had tried. She had loved hard, sacrificed harder, and never imagined a day like this would come. She had believed that love, real love, meant being needed. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I walked to the drawer beside the bed, the one that still slid unevenly, and placed the photo inside. Gently. Not hidden, just put away. I didn't need it out where I could see it every day. I closed the drawer and stood tall. Then I turned toward the window, where a breeze moved through the trees like a breath too long held. And for the first time in years, I locked the door from the inside. Without fear, someone else held a key.